Good morning to everybody. We will commence in less than 2 minutes. Please stay with us. Thank you. Good morning to everybody. My name is Habib Rizwan, and thank you very much for joining us today at ICC UAE webinar on Incoterms 2020, organized in partnership with ICC Georgia. First of all, I will invite Katya Bokhrashvili to give the welcome remarks. So please.
Greetings from ICC Georgia. For those who don't know me in person yet, I'm Secretary General of ICC Georgia, Katya Bokhrashvili. I would like to express my gratitude to all the participants for our first Incoterms 2020 webinar. So we treasure your contributions and time with us, and we hope you will come away with these useful, interesting points together. Let me thank you, ICC UAE, for their partnership as well as technical support for organizing today's webinar process swiftly and smoothly. Let me also thank Ms. Sana Kaftaradze, a member of Executive Committee of ICC Banking Commission Paris and Banking Commission Paris, great supporter and promoter of ICC rules and standards in Georgia as well as in the region, who has helped to organize series of flagship events on behalf of ICC Georgia, with the partnership of ICC globally, including annual meetings of ICC that took place 2 years ago, and of course today's fruitful event in the frames of collaboration and partnership of ICC Georgia, ICC UAE, and ICC Paris. As you are all aware, the Incoterms rules are both essential terms of trade for the sales of goods. Whether you are filing a purchase order, packaging, labeling a shipment for freight transport, preparing a certificate of origin at ports, the Incoterms 2020 rules are there to guide you. The Incoterms rules provide specific guidance to individuals, those individuals participating in the import and export of global trade on a daily basis. Different practices and legal interpretations between traders around the world necessitated a common set of rules and guidelines. As a response, ICC published the first Incoterms rules in 1936, and it's been developed ever since, with the latest changes entering into force from January 2020, and that's called Incoterms 2020. We're pleased to share with you that ebook for Incoterms 2020 is available with ICC Georgia from already autumn 2019, and we've seen a significant interest from the market. So for those who are interested to purchase, feel free to contact me, and then my email will be shared in the chat soon. Now to the most important and honorary part. I'm positive that Vincent O'Brien, a very good friend of ICC Georgia, is well known to most of you, especially for those coming from trade finance and banking area. But as we have a great pleasure hosting lawyers, traders, forwarders, some business procurement representatives, let me try to take the challenge and make a short introduction about Vincent O'Brien, who is a member executive committee of ICC Banking Commission and an acting director of ICC UAE. Mr. O'Brien has been actively involved in trade finance for more than a quarter of a century and has delivered technical assistance for trade finance in more than 100 countries, if I'm not mistaken. Vincent's primary activities delivered, Vincent's activities is just to into trade facilitation with the major multilateral development banks, and he's recognized specialist trade-related dispute resolution, where he often acts as an expert witness in trade dispute and legal cases. Vincent also holds the position of the Associate Director of the Institute of International Banking Law and Practice. And also, I kindly let you know, my dear participants, that at the end of the session, we will have a prize for that participant who will answer the question asked by Vincent in the chat first. So I kindly ask you to stay with us. Let me give the floor to Ms. Sana Kaftaradze, who will provide more insights and inputs. And thank you for your time, and thank you for your participation.
Thanks a lot, Khatia. I hope you can all hear me well. I won't take too much time. Just would like to thank the organizers very much and for the participants for making it today for this paramount importance topic. And thank Vin for the generosity and for his valuable time, because Incoterms is a very, very important part for an integral part of the international trade. And any changes related to Incoterms are paramount for the people who are involved in trade. It can be a banker, it can be a trader, a lawyer, and etc. So we see a diversity of the participants here, which is a very good part of the session. And as you are all aware of Incoterms in general, we will be talking about the changes, the central changes between the Incoterms 2010 and 2020, including the delivery risk and the cost in Incoterms 2020. And I'm sure that Vin will take you through in a very interesting times within this 1 hour and give you the main pinpoints and the main aspects of the changes. Once again, on my behalf, my personal thanks to ICC Georgia, represented by Khatia here, which I didn't manage to meet in person yet due to the COVID, but hopefully we'll meet in person soon. And also, hopefully, unfortunately, I couldn't meet in Dubai with ICC UAE, the host of annual meeting of ICC Banking Commission this year, but hopefully we'll again meet in 2020 March when the ICC annual meeting will be taking place. Thank you, Habib and Joel, for the organizational part, very much appreciated. So let me leave the floor to the Master of Ceremony and Master of Trainings and Master of many, many things to our good friend, Ben O'Brien. And once again, leaving the floor to you, over to you, Vin, and thank you very much for today's session. Enjoy the session.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's always nice to be back in Georgia, whether it's in the virtual world, but I would really prefer it to be in the physical world. But we will do our best, and we'll plan for that soon. Thanks, Habib, Katia, and so let's just get underway. We're going to actually be going through the key changes in Incoterms 2020, and of course, this is the book. And just to emphasize that it is a book of rules. And that's what makes it actually so important, and I guess actually so interesting. So I'm going to share my screen to share a presentation with you, which will take us in a structured manner right through the full program. So here, when you actually look at the cover of the book, which should be on your screen, you actually see that it tells you exactly what it is. It is ICC rules for the use of domestic and international trade terms. So the interesting thing is that this book of rules is used in every country of the world. It's used in every country of the world. And while the book actually says it's for use of domestic and international trade terms, being very open with you, it is used in every country for international trade, but domestically not used so much. But actually the use of Incoterms in domestic trade is actually growing as we go forward, growing slowly, but actually surely. When we look at the Incoterms book, we find that it actually evolved from this book. And this probably is the one you have in your office, so Incoterms 2010. So it's very good that you have a good perspective on the key changes, and you're able to talk about the key changes with your trading counterpart, seller or buyer, or if you work in a bank with your customer, or if you work as a freight forwarder. For the lawyers, of course, Incoterms become part of the international contract of sale between the seller and the buyer by express incorporation. So that highlights again that, these are voluntary rules. They're not mandatory laws or applicable laws, but of course they have a legal effect by incorporation in the contract of sale. Incoterms are around for a long time, and that means they have a lot of credibility. So again, of course, if there's a dispute between the seller and the buyer in court or in arbitration, well, they often look for evidence of some sort. And these rules actually, because they're around for so long, they have the credibility. So long, remember, they were first published in 1936, and they were revised actually 7 times. And the latest version is not Incoterms 2010, Incoterms 2020, which is our subject matter and on the screen in front of you. When I start looking at the transition of the Incoterms, just one or two things to be important. Because they are rules, they should be specific, and they should be, and they are specific on the obligations of the seller and the buyer under the international contract of sale. Now, of course, the Incoterms cannot cover everything in a contract, but they cover the key obligations of the seller and the buyer. And when you look at your screen, on the right-hand side of your screen, you see Incoterms 2020 rules, obligations of the seller and obligations of the buyer. A1 to A10, B1 to B10, A1 to A10, obligations of the seller, B1 to B10. So for each of the 11 Incoterms, we have 10 parameters or obligations of the seller and 10 obligations of the buyer. So for example, under each Incoterm, we would see at A2, we have what's called delivery, and B2, taken delivery. So for each Incoterm, it tells us when the seller has delivered, and of course, it could be at the seller's premises under Ex Works. It could be at the airport of departure, FCA. It could be the port of discharge, CIF, or buyer's premises, DDP, for example. So the key thing is, for each of the 11 Incoterms, we have the parameters or obligations of seller and buyer, and there are 10 of each, A1 to A10, B1 to B10. And of course, what's really important in any contract is when the goods are actually delivered, when the buyer takes delivery. But of course, what's really important is when the risk in the goods transfers from seller to buyer. Now, risk is a very broad word, but in Incoterms, it means specifically when the risk in the goods, if the goods, for example, get lost, damaged, or stolen in between the seller and the buyer, and of course, depending on where the goods are delivered, and of course, that depends on the chosen Incoterm and the implications are for risk. So let's move forward just a little bit and give you a little bit of history. Short is good, don't forget. Okay, so here on the left-hand side of your screen, you have Incoterms 2000. Well, that's history. We don't need to know much about it. But just to know that there used to be 4 very popular Incoterms, DAS, DES, DEQ, and DDU. These were removed or evolved in the revision to Incoterms 2010, which is the book you are currently familiar with. So when Incoterms 2010 was introduced, we had 2 new Incoterms, and you are familiar with them now, and these were DAT and DAP. DAP and DAT, delivered at place, and DAT, delivered at terminal. Now, these new Incoterms were brought into play with feedback from our members around the world, because there was a trend in sellers taking more control of the supply chain. And this also meant that the seller was taking control of the delivery and risk to a named place of destination, usually, of course, practically in the buyer's country, DAP, DAT, delivered at terminal. And under the Incoterms 2010 rules, a terminal was a designated, secured area for delivery of cargo, cargo being goods. So moving forward, fast forward here from Incoterms 2010 to Incoterms 2020. So just some of the key changes, but some of the technical changes I will come to a little bit later in the presentation. But some of the key changes here. Incoterms 2020. So you will be observe on the right-hand side of your screen, we see DAT number 9 coming across the screen to number 9 comes to DPU. So DAT has been removed, or more correctly, I should say, DAT, delivered at terminal, has evolved into the Incoterm, DPU, delivered, place, UFORT, unloaded. And the idea was the Incoterm DAT was very popular in the seller taking responsibility to deliver the goods to a named place, terminal, in the buyer's country. But feedback from our members around the world was that the application was a little bit narrower, too narrow. So it would be better to broaden it out to delivered, named place. And of course, DAT also included unloading. And of course, that named place, if you wish, can be a factory, can be a terminal, can be a designated place for receiving of cargo. So DAT evolving into DPU. A very important, important evolution. Now, another one that's a little bit harder to grasp is this. You will see CIP, it's also highlighted, CIP number 8, CIP, and it's now in kind of an orange color. And this means there's a change, but it's not so substantial, but you need to be aware, particularly if you are moving high value goods. So let me explain. Under Incoterms 2010, for the Incoterm CIF and CIP, CIF and CIP, the requirement was for insurance under minimum terms, okay? And but it was felt, you know, in the evolution of the Incoterms, it should be a facility, a standard facility in the Incoterms to allow a provision for, in one of these Incoterms, for a higher level of cargo insurance. So in a nutshell, here it is. CIF remains the same, cost insurance and freight. Cover is just minimum terms, minimum insurance cover, unless otherwise agreed in the contract, and that's always the case. But under CIP, the standard requirement is that it should be basically for the equivalent of all risk cover. So working in a bank, we very often hear this called Institute Cargo Clause 8. And of course, CIP is an Incoterm used extensively in air freight. And of course, air freight, just to give you a feel for it, is usually for higher value goods based on given the quantity. So again, the insurance cover will be for all risk, a higher level of cover. Moving forward a little bit from these significant changes that we have actually just gone through. Here we have the exporter. He should look familiar to you, okay? Maybe he looks a little bit younger in that picture, but anyway, that's me. So the exporter is exporting all over the world. And of course, this means he's familiar with his own country's regulations, but he cannot be familiar with all the regulations or applicable laws in every country in the world. So different jurisdiction of seller, different jurisdiction of buyer, operating under different laws, different regulation, etc. It's so complicated, but Incoterms facilitate trade. It's a little bit like, to communicate, you need to know your ABC, 3 letters, ABC, or else you cannot communicate. To communicate in international trade, this is the communications device, Incoterms, because each Incoterm is also made up of 3 letters, EXW, FOB, FCA, CIF, etc. So they enable the buyer and the seller to communicate regarding their basic obligations. So for example, I have an exporter in Ireland, and of course I am in Ireland right now physically, but I'm actually representing ICC UAE. But I'm an exporter in Ireland. I quote a price, $3,250,000, CIF Jebel Ali Port Terminal 2. Jebel Ali Port, actually one of the biggest and most active ports in the world, but in the UAE. Incoterms 2020. So 3 little letters, okay? And I want you to help me a little bit, okay? So 3 little letters, I'm going to ask you a few questions about CIF, just to show you that 3 little letters can communicate so much information. So in the chat here, I just want you to respond, type in something, and don't worry, I won't really be checking it, I'll just be observing it. So seller in Ireland, importer in UAE, Incoterm is CIF. CIF, who is responsible for organizing the freight or carriage of the goods, seller or buyer? Very good, seller, you all know, wow, okay. I see some of my friends appearing in the chat and you all know the answer. Of course you do. Okay, under CIF, who is responsible for import clearance? I didn't tell you, but you know because you know the rule, okay? And of course the answer is, who is responsible for import clearance? Under CIF, import clearance taxes, buyer, of course. Okay, very, very good. Under CIF, who is responsible for and must pay for the loading of the goods at the port of shipment? And of course, this is too easy. And of course, you're answering again, and everyone's saying the seller. That's too easy. But here is the tricky question for you. CIF, I'm the seller in Ireland. CIF, Jebel Ali Port Terminal 2. Okay, where does risk transfer in the goods from seller to buyer? And I know most of you will know the answer, but a few of you won't. And if you didn't know the answer, this is really, really important. Under CIF, risk transfer from seller to buyer, where? Port of loading or port of destination. So type in either loading or shipment or destination, whichever you like. Okay? Okay, again, perfect. CIF, name port of destination. Somebody has put in port of destination. Someone has put in discharge port. Somebody else has put in port of loading. Someone else port of shipment. Okay, well, fantastic. And the answer, the correct answer is that based on the rule book, it's at the port of shipment or port of loading. And more of that a little bit later, because we will talk about a dispute regarding force majeure involving CIF, a real case, a recent one. Moving on just a little bit more. Okay, excellent, great. That was easy and clear. So our importer is in Georgia right now, in Tbilisi in Georgia, and maybe importing through Putty Port, and the exporter is me, and I'm here in Ireland. So let's have a quick review, a fast tour of the 11 Incoterms of Incoterms 2020. We must remember that they are international rules. And so Incoterms on a day-to-day basis seem not so interesting. We see them on so many documents. But if there's a dispute and it goes to court, it's amazing how the lawyers pick up the book and say, well, according to the rules, according to the CPT rules, paragraph A3, transfer of risk. So all of a sudden, these things that are very simple on one hand become very serious on another hand when there is a lot of money involved. So when I look at our Incoterms rules, we see we have 11. They're all on your screen there together. And when I look at the 11 Incoterms, key parameters are really important. Who is responsible for the carriage of the goods? Transport, seller, or buyer? When does risk transfer between the seller and the buyer? There are different points, places, and ports where this can occur. And of course, who is going to be responsible, or who has an obligation in respect of the associated cost? Well, of course, when we look at our Incoterms, we got to think about risk. So here I have another question for you. On your screen, you will see a ship. The ship has been loaded with containers. If you look closely, you will see somewhere near the middle of the picture, one of the container doors is open, okay? And my machine, a high-tech machine, was in this container, very expensive machine worth $3 million. It fell out and fell into the water. Now, I am the exporter. Here is the question. I am the exporter, and even though I am the exporter, I am holding in my hand the original marine transport document, the bill of lading. Maybe I'm holding 3 because I have a full set. And the bill of lading is showed shipped on board, named vessel at the port of shipment. Now, the accident happened at the port of shipment, but the goods have been shipped on board. So contractually, if the Incoterm was FOB, port of shipment, whose risk is it? Because something has gone wrong, it's FOB. I hope the buyer has insured the goods, but maybe he hasn't, I don't know. But I want to know from you, whose risk is this, seller or buyer? FOB, and I'm holding the shipped on board bill of lading in my hand, and I'm the seller. So please type in the chat, seller or buyer. Okay, great. You guys, well, guys, you are doing great. Seller. Well, you know what? You are wonderful. You know, and because you're familiar with trade, Incoterms, that question seemed a little bit too easy. But if you know we're not familiar with the rules, if you are not familiar and you are the buyer, and I said, oh, my friend, the goods are loaded here in Hamburg, there's been an accident, your problem, you got to pay under the contract. He'd go, are you crazy? You listen, you need to deliver the goods to me. But that's why the rules are so important. And that's why occasionally a trading company suffers a big loss because they did not understand the implications of Incoterms. Here is another story, but I'm going to skip this because time is short, even though short is good. Okay. Here again, we have the 11 Incoterms, and just keeping it simple, the Incoterms EXW, FCA, FAS, FOB, with all of these, the seller has very little obligation regarding carriage because it's all at the exporter side without going into too much detail. On the CIF, CPT, DAP, DPU, CFR, CIP, the seller has a bigger obligation in respect of the carriage of the goods. But bear with me, we will go into this in detail. Something a little bit more important is that we have rules for any mode of transport. So EXW, FCA, DAP, CPT, CIP, DPU, DDP can be used for any mode of transport. And then we have the marine or inland waterway terms, which you all are so familiar with, FAS, FOB, CIF, CFR. Only 4 for the sea and inland waterway transport. Moving through the Incoterms now individually, but very quickly, because I know you're familiar. And I'm only going to slow down when I come to substantial contractual issues or key points in the changes of Incoterms. So here we have an ICC traditional diagram, seller on the left with the goods, the buyer on the right with the money. And we have local transport, country of export, loading, international transport, unloading. The house with the red flag is import, customs, or clearance. Then we have the blue line, carriage of goods, delivery risk, and cost between seller and buyer, export clearance, import clearance. So we have 11 Incoterms. You're in Georgia, I'm in Dublin in Ireland right now. So you asked me for a price for my high-tech machine, my printing press. And I tell you, well, it's €50,000 EXW Dublin. So that means for carriage of the goods, seller has no obligation. The goods are made available at my premises. Delivery risk, I have no obligation. The goods are delivered at my premises. You must provide the means of conveyance to collect and transport the goods. I even have no obligation for loading the goods on your means of conveyance. So even if I assist you, but something goes wrong, it's your problem. And then, of course, cost. There is no additional cost to the cost of the goods because it's the export price in my factory or my premises. Everything else is for you. So without wasting time, this is not really a good Incoterm for international trade extensively. Now, it can be used, and I have used it, of course, but really, it's kind of difficult because it makes it difficult for the buyer. In fact, it could be impossible for you, the buyer, because you may not be able to get the goods out of our country here in Ireland without export clearance. And of course, under EXW, you, the buyer, are responsible for all export clearance formalities. So moving forward, that's Group E. And there's only one Incoterm basically in Group E. Moving forward to a very practical Incoterm. You're in Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm in Dublin. You want to buy the machine. And I said, well, you know, my friend, FCA could work much better for you as an importer. Because under FCA, it's an S term, FCA. And under all Incoterms 2020 F terms, F, the seller is responsible for export clearance formalities. So I'm selling the goods to you and you say, Vin, can I have a price, FCA, Dublin Airport? And you're nominating the carrier. You are nominating the carrier. And I said, no problem. The price will go up a little bit from the export price because now I must organize carriage of the goods to the airport, FCA, Dublin Airport from my premises. I must also organize the export clearance, a little bit involved in that, but not so much. And of course, then the goods are delivered. When are the goods delivered? Now, this is important. Under FCA, the goods are delivered when they are handed into the custody or taken over by the carrier or the carrier's agent. And under the rules, you should need to know that it's the first carrier, because in a transport of goods, there may be a sequence of the carriers of the goods. But of course, this is to be organized by the buyer or the buyer's agent in the movement of the goods. Of course, if the goods were shipped by, oh, a lot of chats coming in. Okay, right, okay. Lovely, okay, great, okay. Lovely, nothing too substantial. Just back to FCA just for one moment. Under FCA, as we said, it's very practical. Now, Here's something that's emphasized in Incoterms 2020. It was actually also there in Incoterms 2010, but now there's a much greater emphasis and clarity because it's really important right now. FCA can also be used when the delivery point or place is the seller's premises. When we think of seller's premises, we always think of EXW, but FCA can also be used, free carrier. So what does this mean? I'm the seller, the goods are at my premises, but now I'm quoting FCA, not EXW. Well, this means free carrier. It means when your means of conveyance as buyer comes to my premises, now it's at my premises, but under FCA, the seller is responsible for loading the goods on your means of conveyance. Now that's good because loading can be a risk, but now I am responsible as seller. This is good for you, the buyer, even if the price goes up a little bit. And remember as well, really important, good Incoterm, even at seller's premises, because under FCA, and in fact, every F Incoterm, the seller is responsible for export clearance formalities. So FCA, seller's premises, that's a really good tip, something to keep in mind, but the seller is responsible for loading at the seller's premises. Moving forward, now this one will be very short because really there's no change except the reordering of priorities under the individual rules. Free alongside ship. You don't see it used that much, but it's an important Incoterm. Used extensively in the commodity trade. And this would be normally where the seller is exporting the commodity and the buyer is buying a commodity, but the buyer is chartering a vessel or hiring a vessel, a voyage charter or a time charter, a voyage for various ports, time charter for a particular time, hiring the vessel. So I'm the seller. So under FAS, I must deliver the goods on the quay or on a barge, but on the quay is the easiest one to understand, at the port of shipment. So not actually loaded on board. The buyer's vessel will arrive at the port of shipment, and then of course the buyer is responsible for the loading on board the chartered vessel. Normally, but not always, the delivery document will be a charter party bill of lading, receipt for shipment, and then when the goods are shipped on board, there will be an onboard notation. Not exactly, it doesn't have to be that document, but this is the most common document, and it's the easiest way for you to grasp it. So carriage of the goods to the named port of shipment on the quay or on a barge. Risk transfers at that point, usually with the issuance of the typical delivery documents, could be a receipt for shipment, a charter party bill of lading, and of course the seller, buyer is responsible for loading charges and of course international carriage, unloading, import duty, taxes, etc. FAS, Marine Incoterm. Moving on to FOB. Very short because you're all familiar with FOB. FOB, free on board. So again, seller is responsible for delivery of the goods to the port of shipment, marine term. But now we go a little bit further, and on Incoterms 2020, please pay attention to the words I'm going to say. Under FOB, Incoterms 2020, risk transfers, delivery occurs. Delivery occurs by the seller and risk transfers when the goods are placed on board the vessel, and of course it should be a named vessel, at the port of shipment. So carriage now to port of shipment, shipment on board, loaded on board the vessel, risk transfers when placed on board, and of course seller must pay the cost of loading, but then the international freight charges are for the buyer. So for example, if you were to pick up a bill of lading under an FOB shipment, your expectation will be that it will be marked freight collect or freight to be collected. And here I'm looking at it. Yes, it is freight collect because freight is to be paid by the buyer. Now, we might have a question about this later because sometimes it causes complications. Then we move from FOB and we move from FOB, marine term, and we move on to the C term. C terms, CFR, cost and freight, named port of destination. Now we see that the seller is responsible for the carriage of the goods to the named port of destination. So now the seller is organizing the contract of carriage with the carrier or the carrier's agent. Now, interesting, risk transfer still when the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment, CFR strictly marine term, but now the costs are extended because the seller is responsible for the cost, which includes the freight to the named port of destination. And of course, as you all know, the buyer is responsible for unloading charges unless those unloading charges were included in the contract of carriage agreed by the seller. Okay, and of course the buyer is responsible for import duties, taxes, etc., etc. Okay, no big change in this one whatsoever. But let's move on to something a little bit more exciting and a little bit more interesting. But under CFR, marine carriage to the named port of destination. Okay, now CIF. CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. Under CIF, the seller is responsible again for carriage to the named port of destination. The risk transfers at the port of shipment, the same as CFR. The seller must pay for the cost, which is the freight to the named port of shipment. But of course, you know what the I stands for. I stands for insurance. Now, and of course, if it's CIF, you know that the insurance is only required to be on minimum terms as a default position. But if the cargo are of a high value or a higher value in your mind, well, then maybe you need to upgrade the insurance. It is a standard requirement under CIF that the insurance percentage, you all know this, must be for a minimum of 110%. 110%. So basically, while I'm oversimplifying, we could say the seller organizes and procures the insurance, okay, as agreed, seller, but on behalf of the buyer. Because if the risk transfers when the goods are placed on board, then if something goes wrong, well, then the buyer has to make a claim. So now I'm going to slow down because I have an interesting story for you. A very interesting story based on the current environment with COVID-19. And it relates to CIF. So here is the story, and I hope it will make it interesting for you. Okay. I was working on my computer preparing the seminar, and I see Habib has appeared. That's good. Okay. Nice to see you here, Habib. Keeping an eye on me. Okay.
We
So
have
here,
some fun questions if you would like to launch them sometime.
I have, and I'm coming to them very soon. But I want to get my case study out of the way first. But thank you for giving me.
Please. Yes.
So here we are. I'm working on my computer preparing for this Incoterms seminar, and then I get an email. And I get an email, and you see the subject line on the email is, it's our Incoterm we're talking about, CIF, named port of destination, force majeure. Now, in the current environment, COVID-19, we're hearing a lot about force majeure. Force majeure could be that some unforeseen, unexpected event beyond the control of the parties mean the goods cannot be unloaded from a vessel. The goods cannot be removed from the port. Maybe the goods could not even be shipped on board because there is lockdown at the port of shipment. One example. Force majeure could be that the bank is closed, so the documents cannot be delivered. Force majeure could be that the documents relating to a shipment are stuck in the bank because the courier company is not operating. So, but here is a specific question, and it's one that was not uncommon. I got an email from a lady called Ashley, and she's actually saying to me, COVID-19 is problematic for us. Well, I guess actually it's problematic for everybody. So I'm going to zoom in on her message so we can all see it on the screen. COVID-19 is problematic for us, telling me, and wants an answer, okay? We shipped, so Ashley must be the exporter, on the basis of CIF. So we will just say CIF Port B. Port A, port of shipment, port B, port of destination. We shipped on the basis CIF Port B, Incoterms 2020. Okay. The goods were loaded on board the vessel, so a named vessel, so we'll give it a name. So we'll just give it a name Vin, because Vin is a good name, because short is good. It was shipped on board the named vessel Vin at the port of shipment, that's port A, for destination port B. So what's the problem? The problem is that due to lockout at port of destination, Should that be locked down? I don't know anyway. Lockout at port of destination. The goods could not be unloaded and the buyer is unable to take delivery, is suffering from not being able to take delivery of the goods. There's demurrage, etc. Sounds like a sad story. Sounds like a very common story. The buyer is holding back payment. Oh, now I see your problem, Ashley. The buyer is holding back payment due to force majeure at the port of discharge, destination port, which he says is unexpected and beyond his control. Sounds like a force majeure, as it is a state-driven lockdown for health purposes, okay? And I'm thinking of a particular country where this was a huge problem, okay? And Ashley is asking me a question, what can I do as if goods not delivered, we lose payment rights? Well, I guess she's saying when we sell something, we issue an invoice. I guess we should deliver the goods. And I guess if the goods cannot be delivered, the guy will not pay, and maybe the seller loses their payment rights. What can I do as if the goods not delivered, we will lose payment rights? Wow. Now we see here that expressly stated the contract term, the Incoterm is CIF Incoterms 2020. And of course, we understand this is incorporated into the contract. Well, we have some good news for Ashley. And the good news for Ashley, now, of course, I'm not saying you're going to get your money. That's the second question we come to later. Okay? But I have some good news for you. Right now, you seem to feel you have a problem because you're not able to deliver the goods due to the lockout at the port of destination discharge. Well, my dear Ashley, you have already delivered the goods under the rules. Now, this is really important because under CIF, the goods are delivered, contractually delivered, once you have them placed on board at the port of shipment. You have done that. The ship has sailed. The problem is at the port of discharge, so you have fulfilled your contractual obligations. Now, I won't go into the payment right now, but of course, that doesn't mean someone pays you, but it means he has a contractual obligation to pay. So then you need to look at how you're covering the payment risk, but that is another story. Maybe we'll come to it later. Moving on just a little bit. Bottom line, the goods are delivered. The goods are delivered when they are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment, and that's something I hope is good news for you. CPT is used for any mode of transport, used extensively, of course, for air shipments, rail shipments, multimodal shipments. CPT is very similar to CFR, but CFR is strictly a marine term. Carriage of goods, name, place of destination, risk transfers when the goods are placed into the custody of the carrier, and of course the seller pays the cost to the name, place of destination. Okay. And then we move on to CIP, and Habib, I'm sure, is wondering what I'm doing with the poll questions, but they're coming in less than 2 minutes. Okay. Now, under CIP, it's carriage insurance paid. Again, used for any mode of transport, but again, extensively air shipments. But we're going to learn something new about it in a moment. Under CIP, the seller is responsible for the carriage from airport of departure, for example, my example, in Dublin Airport to airport of destination, Tbilisi International Airport. But the risk transfers when the goods are handed into the custody of the carrier or the carrier's agent here in Dublin, and I obtain the customary document or transport document. So, of course, if the goods are going by air, it's airway bill, okay? And if it's CIP and the airway bill is issued, what would you expect this airway bill to be marked? Freight paid or freight collect? In which spot? Just can you write the word paid or collect? Okay, great. Please, you're helping me out here. Good, good, excellent. Okay, CIP, paid, paid, paid. Okay, now is a good time. Habib, could I ask you to run our poll questions, and we're going to go through all of them step by step, and over to you for a moment or two.
Thank you, surely. So I'll be launching the first one. It will be open for 10 seconds for the reply from the participant.
The Incoterms 2020 bring increased insurance requirement for, you've got to pick one of these. This is a change, a substantial change.
Yeah, so poll started now. We are waiting for the responses. And okay, so I'll end it now.
Perfect. That was about
We'll
5 seconds.
share the result, which is 78% CIP.
Very good. So nearly
Yeah.
80% of you already understand that the insurance requirement for CIP has changed. Not CIF, CIP, it has increased. Very good. Second question.
Okay. Second one is here. Deliver a terminal has been renamed to FAS, CPT, or DPU.
I hope we get a good score on this.
Yeah. So
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and Habib.
okay, so we share the result now, and we have 96% DPU.
96%. That's nearly 100%. I'm happy with that. Next question, Habib.
Okay, so we go to the third one, and here we are. Is Incoterm 2020 now the only version of Incoterm that can be used? Yes or no?
I did not answer this question. Tricky question, Habib. Okay.
Yeah. So we will
Only
be
using the term 2020.
3, 2, 1, and we will end it now. And 88% saying no. Which is
Very good. Nearly 90%. That
yeah.
is wonderful. And just to make the point before, I think you have one more question. Just to make the point, Incoterms 2020, like Incoterms 2010, are voluntary rules. So if you are using Incoterms 2010 and you like it, you can stick with it. But I would recommend you upgrade because the specifications regarding delivery and risk have been prioritized and it's a little bit clearer. So I would upgrade and go for 2020. But no problem, they are voluntary rules. Habib, I think we have one more question.
Yeah, the last one, which is the fourth one. When does title to the goods transfer from seller to buyer under FOB? Port of loading, port of discharge. Title does not transfer under Incoterm rule FOB.
Oh, and I didn't cover this either. I forgot.
So
maybe I
didn't. Okay, so I'll close the polling now, and the result is here.
When does title to the goods transfer from seller to buyer under FOB? Well, 56% have it. That's very interesting.
Yes.
That, at the port of loading. And you know, it kind of sounds like the right answer. FOB, placed on name vessel by the seller. It sounds correct. Port of discharge, okay. And then title does not transfer, 13%. So now I'm going to slow down a little bit because this is just so important. Just for a second. Under the Incoterms rules, FOB or any of the Incoterms rules, it does not deal with transfer of title, as in ownership of the goods or the ability to take possession of the goods. When we hear FOB and goods placed on board the vessel, you think it does, but it does not. So title is not dealt with. So this must be expressly and specifically dealt with in the contract of sale between the seller and the buyer. Wonderful. So now, my dear friends, we're coming not quite yet to the end of our seminar, but to the end of the Incoterms. So, for example, next Incoterm is one of the D terms, where the seller is responsible for the delivery. So the risk is staying with the seller in the carriage of the goods to a named place of destination. So DAP, delivered at place, named place of destination. I'm in Ireland, you're in Tbilisi in Georgia, okay? Especially in this lockdown, you would like me to take responsibility for delivery of the goods. But let's explain the rules. Under DAP, name place of destination, and if the name place of destination was Tbilisi International Airport, I would be responsible for carriage of the goods to the airport, okay? So I am responsible. The risk also stays with me until the designated name place, Tbilisi International Airport. This is a key change. And I must pay all costs until Tbilisi International Airport. Now, of course, if the goods don't get to Tbilisi because I have a problem with airlines or whatever, okay, well then I have not contractually delivered the goods. And then if I have not contractually delivered the goods, well, of course, quite likely, you do not have a contractual obligation to pay, okay, quite possibly. Now, under DAP, it's important to note that from the seller's perspective, it does not include the unloading charges at the named place of destination. Now, in an air shipment, it's not that important because the air freight is usually included in the international freight. But if this was used for marine shipment of a commodity, a cargo, it could be very important because DAP does not include unloading. So if it was a vessel, a ship full of beef, a ship full of coal, a ship full of oil, well, of course, it does not include unloading for the buyer, and of course, import duties and taxes for account of the buyer. Moving on to the brand new Incoterm, DPU. I'm getting confused. Brand new Incoterm. DPU, delivered, placed, unloaded. So under the DPU Incoterm, the seller is responsible for carriage to the named place of destination. Yeah. The risk stays with the seller to the named place of destination. For example, Tbilisi International Airport. The seller must pay all costs until the goods are delivered to the designated named place of destination in my story, Tbilisi International Airport. You know, my dear friends, maybe I am getting confused because it sounds exactly the same as DAP. But actually, it's not. Because under DPU, DPU for the seller always includes the unloading of the cargo at the designated named place of destination. And again, if it is an air shipment, it's not so important. But if it was a marine shipment, and it can be used for marine shipment, and it was a chartered vessel, and of course, if it was chartered, this time it will be chartered by the seller, okay? Not like FAS, because I'm responsible for the carriage of the goods to the named place or port of destination, unloading charges for account of the seller, but import duties, taxes, etc. for the account of the buyer. Bringing us to our final Incoterm, and we're pretty much on time. Bringing us to our final Incoterm, which is DDP, maximum obligation of the seller to the buyer. Oh, and I have a few questions coming in here. Yeah, very, very good. Oh, someone is asking me the difference between a CIP and CIF for a marine shipment. That is a very good question. The difference between CIP and CIF for a marine shipment, because Mr. O'Brien, you said CIP can be used for any mode of transport, so also marine. Okay, I'll answer in a moment. Very good question. Okay, very good question. DDP, last Incoterm, maximum obligation of the seller to the buyer. Seller must deliver the goods, deliver duty paid to the buyer's premises in, for example, Tbilisi, Georgia. I'm in Ireland, you're in Georgia right now. You can forget it. I'm not selling to you DDP, especially in the current environment. It's just too complicated. How I would organize customs clearance, etc. in Georgia, even though it's very, very well organized in Georgia, but I'm over here in Ireland, I don't think so. I think we will go for DPU. Delivered, placed, unloaded, shipment by air to Tbilisi. That sounds good to me. So these are our 11 Incoterms, under Incoterms 2020. So now, my dear friends, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the Incoterms 2020 quiz. Now, this is not to win the ebook. This is just getting you warmed up and ready maybe to win the ebook. And remember, when we come to the end, you need to be very fast and type in the answer. This is not it. This is just preparation. Type in the answer and someone will win the ebook on Incoterms 2020. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go through a number of questions. As I go through them, they will appear on your screen. I just want you very quickly to type the answer in the chat, if that is okay. And oh, I have that question again in the Q&A from someone else. CIS, CIP, Marine Shipment must be important to someone in Georgia. I promise I'll come back to it. Okay. Okay, here we go with our Incoterms quiz 2020. In all the Incoterms 2020 rules, the seller has an obligation to provide the buyer with a commercial invoice. True or false? Yes, true, yes, true, 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 and the answer is true. For every Incoterm, the seller must provide an invoice, but that's too easy. Second question, get ready to type in the answer, true or false. Under X works, the seller delivers, EXW, the seller delivers when it places the goods at the disposal of the buyer at the seller's premises loaded on the buyer's collecting vehicle. True or false? So seller must load under EXW, and the answers are all piling in. False, 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 false. Everyone got this one right. You guys are absolutely amazing. Okay, everyone got that one right. The first one most, but this one everyone. Okay, when CPT, CIP, CFR, CIF are used, the seller fulfills this obligation to deliver when it hands over the goods to the carrier in the manner specified in the chosen rule, and not when the goods reach the named port of destination or place of destination. Wow, that's a little bit tricky. True or false? And the answer is when the seller hands over the goods to the carrier in the manner specified. And excellent, you have all got it correct. True, 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 true. And someone typed yes, but I think that means true. Okay, here we go, just a few more. Under which of the Incoterms 2020 rules must the seller deliver the goods on a quay or a barge at the port of shipment nominated by the buyer? The risk of loss or damage to the goods passes when the goods are delivered on the quay or barge, and when the buyer bears all costs from that moment. So we have 11 Incoterms, and based on the contractual scenario, you have to pick the Incoterm. So type three letters, please, in the chat if you don't mind. Yeah, great. Wonderful. And I'm looking at it here. FAS, 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 FAS. Wonderful. And of course, the answer is FAS, free alongside ship. You guys are absolutely great. Oh my God. Under CIF 2020, the buyer must clear the goods for import. Well, I guess the answer is true because I pressed the button. I was too enthusiastic. Okay, we'll go on with one or two more. Interesting one. Now, this one is interesting, and I'm slowing down. Under the Incoterm FCA, the term FCA, when the goods are picked up at the seller's premises, I guess picked up by the buyer or the buyer's agent, okay? Picked up at the seller's premises, FCA, it is clarified in the Incoterms rules that the goods must be loaded by, so when it's FCA seller's premises, who must load the goods? The buyer, the carrier, or the seller? And this one is a little bit tricky. Seller, 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 carrier, seller, seller, agent, seller, 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 what? Seller. Seller is the correct answer. Okay, we will go on a little bit more, but not many more. A bill of lading, the bill of lading, has been issued by the carrier in respect of a contract of sale between the seller and the buyer. So the contract was CIF basis, cost, insurance, and freight. So on reviewing the bill of lading, if it's CIF, you need to be fast. You would expect the bill of lading, to be marked freight collect, freight paid, or freight not applicable. Which one? Collect, paid, not applicable. Applicable, CIF. And again, you guys are answering so quickly, it's quite amazing. Okay, really, okay. And the answer is freight paid, freight paid, freight paid, seller paid, freight paid, freight paid, freight paid, paid. You guys are amazing. Okay, fantastic. Okay, so now, under the term starting with C or D, it is for the buyer to make the contract of carriage with the carrier. True or false? True or false? True or false? And the answers again are coming in quickly. Okay. Under the term starting with the letter C or D, it is for the buyer to make the contract of carriage. Someone wrote true, but now we have false, 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 false. And the answer, of course, the answer is false, because under C and D, the seller is responsible for the carriage to the named place, point, or port of destination. Absolutely amazing. Okay, so under the term FOB, I'll do one or two more. Under the term FOB of the Incoterms rules, ownership or property rights in the goods. Under the term FOB of the Incoterms rules, ownership or property rights in the goods transferred from seller to buyer when the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. You all know the answer. True or false? And I see Habib is appearing again. This means I'm getting a message, okay? And the answer is true, false. Okay. Very good. Never trust, I hear some of you saying it, never trust an Irishman, okay? Because you guys are amazing, okay? Because you all now remember, everyone remembers, that the Incoterms do not deal with the transfer of title to the goods, okay? You all know, absolutely fantastic. Habib, I just think I have one or two more and then
Yes.
we will be finished. Because I know Habib is an
Yes.
expert in timekeeping, you know? It's really, okay. Look at the picture. At which point, 1, 2, or 3, risk transfers from seller to buyer when the Incoterm is CIF, name port of destination. So I want you to type in 1, 2, or 3. Pick one of the numbers, 1, 2, or 3. So CIF risk transfers at 1, 2, or 3. So 1 at the port of loading, 2 when the goods are placed on board, or 3 I think is just coming up to the port of destination. And of course you guys are all fantastic. 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. 1 is 3, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And you are 2, 2, 2 good. Okay, so that's exactly it. It's number 2 when the goods are placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment. Okay, I think we're nearly there. Oh, 1 or 2 more. And we're still okay for time. It is possible to use both EXW seller's premises and FCA seller's premises. Now that's something good to learn. Export seller premises and FCA. Now here's the question. Which of the following outlines the primary duties between these terms? FCA includes loading by the seller but not export clearance. FCA, okay. FCA includes export clearance by the seller but not loading. FCA includes loading at seller's premises and export clearance. Oh, and someone has typed number 3, even though there's no numbers on the question. I should need to fix my question. But actually, yeah, you're right. Number 3, it is actually the third one. So now we have the last question. And this is a tough question. Which is the best, FOB or VOB? Did we cover VOB? I'm not sure. So you need to pick and type in FOB or VOB. Which is the best?
Of course, VOB.
Oh, VOB. VOB, I'm sure. VOB, and of course, we all know there's no competition here. FOB is very important, but VOB, Vincent O'Brien, is the best, and there just is no comparison. Okay. Of course, I'm joking. Of course, I'm joking. So, my dear friends, that is our tour. I think Vincent O'Brien on time, every time. So our Incoterms 2020. And Habib, back to you just for a moment. Yep. Then.
Yeah, I think there was one question, Vincent, which was somebody asked that if Incoterm does not cover the transfer of title from the seller to the buyer, then how do they manage? How do they practice this transfer of title from seller to buyer?
Okay, well, this could be this could be a whole new seminar, but I'm still going to answer the question.
Okay.
It could be a whole new seminar, but I'll answer the question. Incoterms do not deal with the transfer of title, so how do you do it? Well, this means that you need to expressly state in the contract when title or ownership of the goods transfers from seller to buyer. And most often this is actually stated, now I'm saying most often, not always, usually it is actually stating that title ownership of the goods transfers from seller to buyer when the goods are actually paid for, okay? Now you can alternatively try to say, if you're dealing in commodities, that transfer of title happens in the contract when the goods are actually placed on board the vessel, and then in practice this will be done by way of endorsement and delivery of the bill of lading. But the standard default position is usually when the goods are actually paid for. But the most important thing to remember is Incoterms do not deal with transfer of title at all. So thank you, Habib, for bringing that to my attention.
You're welcome.
Bin, I also remember there was a question about CIF and CIP with regards to the marine shipment.
Yeah, this is a really good question as well. And it's funny, it's a very interesting one for bankers, because when bankers, you know, are thinking about marine shipments, we always just think about bills of lading. And, you know, like me, I really love shipped on board stamps. I don't know what it is that the goods are shipped on board. But to answer the question, technically and legally, the difference between CIF and CIP for marine shipments is this. Under CIF, it's very, very clear, you already know, the goods are delivered, risk transfers, when they are placed on board the named vessel at the port of shipment. So you know that. But CIP is slightly different and harder a little bit to grasp, okay? Under CIP, the risk transfers from seller to buyer, dare I say, a little bit earlier. I hope these are the right words, but it explains it. A little bit earlier in that under CIP, risk transfers from seller to buyer once the goods are handed into the custody of the carrier at the port of shipment. So this is actually before the goods are actually shipped on board. And again, to emphasize, under CIP, risk transfers, delivery occurs when the goods are handed into the custody of the carrier, and that is the first carrier if there's a chain of carriers, where under CIF, it's when the goods are actually placed on board the vessel at the port of shipment, typically evidenced by a onboard notation or shipped on board bill of lading. So I hope that's okay.
Thank you. So, and Khatia just reminded me not to forget with these interactions, the prize draw.
Oh, the prize.
Okay.
Okay.
Whenever
so
you.
Here, yeah, everyone, please get ready at the chat. Okay. So I'm going to ask a question, and you must type in. And in the chat, it will be totally transparent because we will see who just manages to type first. So I am going to ask a question, and you must type in the answer, and the answer is going to be a number. Okay? Question: Incoterms were first published in what year?
6.
Okay. Yeah. Well, can you see my other panelists? Can you see the chat? I can see it. Yeah.
Yes, we can see the chat. Yeah.
And have we a first entry that you can read the name? Anyone?
Yeah, it is. Just a second. It was from Katie.
Right?
Yeah, Katie, K-E-T-I.
Responded.
Katia, could you pronounce it? I think you'll do it better than Habib.
Miss Katie Meskhishvili, who provided
Wonderful.
first and correct answer.
Wonderful, Katia. That's absolutely wonderful. So you will be receiving your ebook on Incoterms 2020.
Absolutely.
Great. Katia, can we see you? It'd be nice to see you before we say goodbye, you know?
Of course.
Mysterious.
Yes, I think I'm visible, I'm audible.
Great. So I just want to, before you wrap up, I just want to say thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. ICC UAE, delighted to work with ICC Georgia. As you know, I'm always delighted to work in Georgia, virtually or otherwise. And Habib, thanks for managing the session so well. And ladies, I will leave the final word to you before we depart.
Vincent, if I heard that comes to me, right? My final saying goodbye. First, I would like to thank you, Vincent. My cordial thanks to you for your precious, priceless, and valuable contribution. Special thanks to Anna for her support and backup to make this event happen today. Also, special thanks to ICC UAE for the generous support, partnership, and friendship. And thank you all participants for joining, for your interest, for your contribution, for your participation, and I hope you enjoyed a lot. I look forward to seeing you next time in a series of fruitful webinars and events supporting international trade with cooperation of our partner ICCs worldwide. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Katia.